Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to season two, I believe I typed episode 15 of Living in the Texas Hill Country. So today we're going to talk about conservation easements. And I think this is one of those topics that Carly and I have been talking about, and we're finally glad that we were able to make this happen. But we want to welcome our guests with us. So this is Jeff Crosby with Colorado River Land Trust. So I guess, Jeff, do you want to just give us a little introduction about sort of what you do with Colorado River Land Trust? Yeah, just give us a little rundown.
Sure, sure. Thanks, Liz and Carly. Thanks both of you for inviting me on here today. Happy to be here. So yeah, Jeff Crosby. I've been with Colorado River Land Trust for a little over 10 years now, about 11 years, and that whole time I've been have been the executive director of the organization. So we're officed in the Central Texas area outside of Austin, and we work up and down, as the name suggests, Colorado River watershed, everywhere from, so pretty diverse area, but everywhere from the coast, Matagorda Bay, where the river empties into the to the Gulf down there, and then all the way up into the high plains, kind of outside of Lubbock, and any tributary creek or river that ends up in the Colorado. So half the majority of half of Blanco County, more or less, Pedernales, all that stuff, ends up in the Colorado. So yeah, and we're I don't want to jump the gun here, but we're a
Go for
nonprofit
it.
um, land conservation organization, and we've been around since formally 2012, but 2014, about a year before I joined the team, uh, we really actually got started. So about 2014, and we have a great board of directors. There are 11 of them on there right now. We don't have a set number. We have a cap, and we kind of move around, but 11 board members currently, and they're like I said, it's a great group, geographically diverse. Just given kind of where we work, we try to get folks that represent the each geography. So we have a couple kind of in the lower part of the river, Houston, Columbus, Texas, down that area, and then a couple from the sort of greater Austin area, and then one from Blanco County, San Saba County. So we try to get as much of the area that we work represented, because obviously what matters and what occurs in San Saba County is dramatically different than Wharton County. So totally different issues, totally different set of landowners and everything like that. So we try to get all that into one organization. So a great group, as I said, and yeah, and our primary tool that we use for accomplishing our mission is the conservation easement, which is what we're here to talk about. I think we do own outright a few smaller parcels of land, but it's not necessarily our preference. So we prefer to work directly with the private farmers and ranchers and doing conservation easements.
And I think with conservation easements, there's a lot of, we're kind of here to, I'll say, dispel a lot of misconceptions about conservation easements, because I think a lot of people hear that and they immediately get like a little, they're like, I'm not too sure about that. I guess let's start like very, very basic. So like for somebody that has never heard the word conservation easement, um, can you just explain to us a little bit what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the I agree to your point, Liz, that a lot of people, when you just hear that term, it is kind of a red flag, like, whoa, I don't,
Yep.
because
When
there
you're
are there
yeah,
are
you're trying to purchase it, something for yourself,
yeah,
your neighbor's gonna get it. You're just like,
you're like,
I
yeah,
don't
that
know if
can't
I
be
feel
good.
about
That
this.
doesn't sound good. Something's wrong with that. So we definitely address that frequently. So what it before going into those concerns, what it actually is, the word that I always like to use is it's voluntary. So these are voluntary agreements between a landowner or a group of landowners that own a property and a qualified holder of that conservation easement, which would be an organization like Colorado River Land Trust. There's other land trusts that work in Texas. There's about, I think, right around 30, kind of give or take, land trusts in the state. There's a couple that are statewide, obviously a giant state, so there's not very many that do that. A lot of them are very tied to a geography. So uh, focused on the Houston area or in the Hill Country, or there's some up in the Dallas Metroplex. There's also several that focus strictly on certain types of um, resources. So there's one that does only native prairie conservation, the ones that do just wetlands. So really diverse group. Sorry, I wasn't totally answering your question, but there's about 30 of those land trusts that are the qualified holder that would be involved in that conservation easement. And really what it is that it's that voluntary agreement that between those two parties that limits the development, the type of or the amount of development on a property to protect whatever those natural resource values are on that land, whether it's water, whether it's prime farmland soils, whether it's wildlife habitat, whatever is on that property is being protected through that conservation easement. Um, all of that is done while still making sure that it's privately owned and privately managed. So it still remains 100% privately owned by you, the owner of the property. You're not conveying any ownership interest to a group like us or any of the other land trusts. So it's one of the major points that I always like to make. Still private, and you can still sell the property subject to that easement. You can gift it to your kids. You can convey it to another LLC entity. You can still do everything you can do with property ownership. That conservation easement just goes with the title to that property to permanently protect whatever those resources are that conservation, agriculture, whatever they were agreed upon on that property. So
And I guess we'll kind of take like a slight, like I told you, Jeff, we have tangents here, related tangent. But so one thing you had mentioned is that, and I think one of the big misnomers about conservation easements is like you can't develop on a conservation easement. But hypothetically you could, it's just you have to follow within the parameters that either you're setting up or the previous person set up that you purchased the property from, correct?
that is
In
accurate.
short.
Yeah. So one of the that is a misconception, but it's also can be accurate. Mainly because some of the old, I won't blame any organizations, but some old conservation easements that were done that really did muddy the waters. And what people, if you're a farmer or rancher in Texas, those are the ones they really were not designed for the private landowner. They were designed by another entity to protect whatever, and they kind of hamstrung you. So they did make it extremely difficult to do anything. If you wanted to, hey, we need to remove some trees because of whatever reason, everything was very difficult. So there are bad examples out there. I will say now, over the last decade, the vast majority of conservation easements and entities like us that are in the field, we understand that, hey, this is supposed to be a perpetual document. Like tying the hands forever is our approach. I won't speak for everyone, is absolutely not the way to go. Like we have zero interest in that, zero belief that that's actually doing good conservation. So to answer your question, there were some bad ones that you could not do that on. Now they are we actually encourage you, hey, if even people that sit down and say, okay, I want no development ever, like, okay, I get that today, that makes sense. What about your kids, or if they sell it and they want to do something like you want this to be a usable property for whatever purpose. Like, let's think through some of these things and make sure, maybe we carve out 5 acres or 10 acres or what 1 acre, whatever makes sense, but just to allow flexibility for, development, so to speak. We also, our conservation easements, one thing that I've kind of danced around a few times, every conservation easement is completely different. So there's not a here it is, take it or leave it, one size fits all. They are tailored to the specific property, whatever's on that property. So like kind of back to the, San Saba versus Wharton County, they're totally different resources that you're talking about. So they're tailored to that property, but they're also tailored to the family or owner of that property. So what your goals are, what your family, maybe you have 3 kids and they all want to have a house on the property. Like, okay, well, let's make sure there's 3 spots you can, without any question, build houses for the kids. But we also we want them to be productive
Mhm.
properties, not just a nature preserve that sits there and maybe it's good for the birds or whatever, but actually a productive um, piece of property. So our conservation easements all allow agriculture
Oh.
structures. So you can build, fencing, water structures, corrals, pens, barns, related, all that agriculture, that is not at all impacted. And we explicitly note that in there, that none of this is at all impacted by this conservation easement. It's really just to prevent, from a new 500 rooftop neighborhood to be coming up or chopped up into little 1 acres and a trailer park or something. So that's the development we're trying to protect the properties from, but we're trying not to hamstring landowners. They can still manage it and run whatever operation they see fit today, but then also say in 50 years, someone can still run something, different on that property, but it is available for whatever that production is. So,
So you'd mentioned, obviously it seems like they're very flexible. It's kind of like you said, it's tailored to the landowner at the time. Are there any other restrictions in regards to, like, I know, up in the hill country, a lot of properties are on the smaller side. So are there like minimum acreage requirements or anything, any other sort of weird minimum acreage comes to mind for me, but are there any other weird, I hate to say weird, but any other restrictions that people may not think of when it comes to, if they want a conservation easement, they may not qualify for it because of something they have on their property.
right. So we as an organization do not have a minimum or maximum size. The only kind of thing that limits it is some of the things that you have to do. So if you have to do a survey and different things like that we can talk about later, um, those costs are almost similar if you have 10 acres to if you have 1,000 acres. So you got to do that stuff. So is it financially viable is when it becomes, and that's up, we don't make that decision. If it's financially viable for you as the owner, then, we'll work with you. So we have our smallest conservation easement is we have a 10-acre one. That's actually in Burnett County. But it's on the lake, has some lake frontage on it. So it had protected from development, but there does also need to be some type of conservation value that would be that you could defend that, hey, here's why we're, working with landowner, Joe and Sally here for conservation because this property has some conservation value. So just doing like someone's backyard, uh, it's not going to qualify for sure. So, but you can do, I mean, there are urban, we don't do those, but there are urban, quote unquote, conservation easements that do more of a recreational kind of park stuff that those are perfectly fine and obviously much smaller parcels than in rural areas. So, and then the main restrictions that govern it. So we basically take what the IRS the Internal Revenue Service, they're the ones who allow for the conservation easements. If you want to do them, here's the requirements to qualify for a conservation easement, and that's where we stop. We don't add any of our other anything beyond that. We just do what does the law require, and that's where we stop. So the main things in there are surface mining, which is so again, if you're trying to protect the land and then there's a surface mine, obviously direct competition from that. But again, they're not all, that isn't an automatic one. So if you have 100 acres and you have a quarry over here that's on 20 acres, you can carve that out and put the rest into conservation. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. But surface mining is one if the whole property is surface mined. And then for us, the other major restriction is subdivision. So smaller subdivision of the tract. And again, like I've said a couple of times, there's also caveats to that. So it can be whatever you want. So back to the family that has 3 kids, if you have, we'll make it easy so I can do math. If you have 600 acres and you have 3 kids and you say, okay, well, it's 600 acres, but maybe each kid wants, so we can put in there, you can't subdivide this except for into 3 200-acre parcels. So each kid could have, a portion of the ranch, but it's still under conservation easement. But, John owns this, Sally owns this, so each 200. So there are ways to do that, but there's no, the subdivision is the major, cutting it up into small parcels is the major prohibition. Beyond that, pretty much anything that's your kind of standard open space, ag, recreation use is 100% unchanged by the conservation easement. So you can still hunt, fish, run cattle, run goats, grow wheat, whatever you want to do. The conservation easement will not, our conservation easement will not impact that. And again, so we try not to tie it to one, like, hey, you have to run cattle on this, right? That might make sense today, but in 20, 30 years, like, hey, we got some new thing, and this document says we have to run cattle, but what are we doing here? So we try to make it kind of a living document where, hey, it's protecting the resources, but it can adjust to, changing conditions as time goes on. So a real just into the weeds detail that we get a lot of times, people want to say, hey, well, I want to only have this pesticide that can be used on the property. Like, okay, I get that, but we don't want to put that into a conservation easement because what about a long time ago we had DDT and that was great, but now we
Not
definitely
good.
can't do that. So if it said, hey, the only thing you can use is DDT, like, well, whoops, what are we
Yep.
doing here? So, you know, limiting, getting specific into those things is not something we do. Like we want that document to be able to move through time and still protect kind of whatever the initial intent of the owner was. Hey, we want to protect this 500 acres for, working ag land production or for our family's hunting legacy, whatever it is, we want to make sure that it can move with that as time changes or land use changes, that kind of stuff.
So it kind of honestly, kind of my brain, the way I'm working is it really honestly sounds like a conservation easement is similar to like a 1D1 wildlife tax valuation ag. The goal of a conservation easement is to keep a property in open space, keep it wild, keep it from being developed. But the big caveat with a conservation easement is it is a legally binding, would the word contract be a proper term?
Yeah,
To
yeah,
keep it in open spaces. Through time, it will stay open space versus if you're in, a 1D1 or tax valuation is, the next person that buys it could decide, you know what, I don't
yeah,
want to keep it and then just sell it off and, break it up into, a development or a strip mall or what have you.
yeah.
Would that be
Yep,
fairly
that's accurate.
nationwide?
It basically we sometimes use this term. You said it in your description, but it binds the good intentions of that landowner to the land. So, like you're saying, excuse me, like you can be in, 1D1 wildlife, and those are good intentions. But if you sell it tomorrow, and I want to turn it into 300 houses, I can do that, obviously within the law. But if you have that conservation easement and you wanted it protected, I can sell it. But nobody, your intentions are tied to that land. So, yeah.
So are there any, I mean, kind of speaking on tax valuation stuff, are there any, I'll say like financial incentives or incentives with just the conservation easement itself on a property?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's really 2.5 different ways you can do a conservation easement. I'll,
Two and
I'll
a half.
mention the half. It's basically combining the other two, so it's a half.
Mhm.
So you can either donate, quote unquote, donate that conservation easement to an entity like Colorado River Land Trust, and if you do that, there are significant income tax deductions that can go with that. So that value um, of that conservation easement, which is determined by an independent actual real estate appraiser, that value can be a tax deduction for you and your spouse or however the ownership is for your personal income taxes. So that can be a huge benefit, kind of twofold. I don't want to get into tax law, one, because I'm not qualified, but two, it's painful. But high level, two different ways. So if it's just a regular, you have a piece of property out there and you do this conservation easement, you can deduct up to 50% of your income based on that, whatever that value is. So if you have a multi-million-dollar conservation easement, you can deduct for years, you can carry that forward until you use up a lot. If you are actually what the IRS determines a qualified farmer and rancher. So if you make the majority of your income from the practice of farming and ranching, you can actually deduct up to 100% of your income. So conceivably, when you're in just farming and ranching, income is relative term there. So it might not always, but you can actually be tax-free, income tax-free, until you use up the value of that conservation easement, which you have 15 years
Okay.
to use that whole thing up. So that's one, the donated side. You can also sell the conservation easement. So it's the same process all the way up until the end. And then instead of getting the $1 million for the tax deduction, you can get, we'll say you can get the $1 million in cash payments to you, landowner, for this conservation easement. You end up at the same spot, conservation easement on the same property. One gives you cash, one gives you uh, the tax deductions. More commonly than that second one is the half one that I mentioned. It's really a bargain sale. So it's a little bit of both. So instead of getting $1 million tax deduction or $1 million cash, you do say, hey, we can't, because the funding for these things is limited. And we can talk about some of the funding sources here in Texas. There's limited funding sources. So we could say, hey, maybe we've got this $1 million conservation easement on this ranch. We can get you whatever, $300,000 in cash from this funding source, and you would donate the remainder of that. So you'd get 700,000 tax deduction, 300,000 in cash payment. Same thing, we'd end up at the same spot with the conservation easement, but you're able to get a little bit of both, some tax deduction and some actual cash. So that's a far more common approach for a lot of reasons. One, you actually can get cash in your hand and still own the property. You're not selling the property. You're kind of capitalizing on a non-performing asset, right? You're like, I can't get anything for this unless I sell it, but I don't want to sell it. So if I do this conservation easement, I can get some value for it and I still own it, 100% still own it. And you can use that money for whatever, it's just like the sale of a real estate asset. You can use it to buy more land, you can pay off debt, whatever you want to do with it. It's totally up to you. So yeah, so that's a far more common approach than just, very rarely is there 100% cash for your the value of your easement, just because as we all know, we were talking before we started, the value of land in Texas is going up exponentially. So a conservation easement is tied to the value of that land. So as the land goes up in value, that easement goes up. So we're talking about, pretty sizable values that don't,
Mhm.
so we're not millions of dollars in cash is not sitting around for conservation easements, unfortunately. So
So you had mentioned some of those, you kind of mentioned that there is funding. So what are some of those funding sources that people could, would that be something that they would look into, or would that be something that y'all would look into for them, I'll say?
yeah, what we've either way, to
Okay.
be honest. But the to go after the funding sources. So we've had people come to us that say, "Hey, I was talking to so and so at the funding source. They said to talk to you." But we also the other way. Hey, we should go talk to the funding source. So the main ones are in Texas are the NRCS that all landowners are familiar with. They have an agricultural conservation easement program that they run, and it's the largest one, but in the largest single source here in Texas, but again, not huge. They get an allocation of 5 to 7-ish million per year for the entire state, which, as we just talked about,
It's,
property values, five to
I feel
seven
like
million.
that's not a lot.
It doesn't go very far, for sure, but it is a source, and what we try to do is, we'll get a little bit from here, a little bit from here, and put it all together, and then give it to the landowner. So NRCS, their agricultural conservation easement program is a great source. So that's one a lot of times if landowners have a relationship with NRCS and they start talking about conservation easements or something like that, a lot of times the NRCS, the district conservationists will say, "Hey, we have this program, but you need to talk to
Mm.
a land trust." And so that program, unlike most of the other NRCS programs, the land trust has to apply on your behalf. So we don't get any funding from it, but if we're asking for whatever $300,000 for your ranch, we have to do the application and fill all that out, and we submit it saying, "Hey, we are working with Liz over here on this conservation easement. We want $300,000 for this." So we do it on your behalf. So that's the main source. The other source is the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department.
Mm.
They have a program called the Texas Farm and Ranch Land Conservation Program. It's like how long can we make these program names?
Rolls off the tongue.
Yeah, I always have to stop and think like, okay, agricultural conservation easement program. But the state, Texas Parks and Wildlife has a program, and they get also a small amount, so they get 2 million, but that's for every 2 years. So every biennium, the legislature they get 2 million. There's been a lot of effort to try to increase that. Hopefully, we're successful at some point, but that 2 million goes really quick. Again, there are competitive pots of money that, as land trusts are out there and say, "Hey, we're working with this landowner and that landowner," and they do the applications and submit them. And Parks and Wildlife or NRCS, they have to rank them and score them, and then there's more demand than funds. So you're hoping that you can put a good property, a good project in there, but those are the two primary sources. There's some other private foundation money um, that's kind of come out here over the last few years. It's sort of in response to the limited uh, public money that Texas gets. That, hey, we need money into conservation, and so there's some private groups, private foundations that have stepped in, and that so you're able to kind of, again, to that point, piecemeal as much together as you possibly can for the owners, if they're interested in conservation. So those are the main ones right now, but always on the lookout for more.
And so I don't know, this is kind of a slightly random question. Do you know of other states? So for NRCS, is it Do you know if every state gets the same amount of funds, or is it kind of in proportion to population or land area for the state? Do you know, or is that just, if you
Oh,
don't know, that's fine. I just was
I know,
curious.
I know a partial answer to your question, not the whole thing. I know that all states don't get the same amount.
Okay.
But I think, and I don't know, this is where I'll say I don't know, so asterisk. Um, I think it's based on demand and like ability to execute. So and kind of leverage, kind of your leverage, right? So we don't have a huge matching programs here in Texas. So if they give us $50 million, like, well, that's great. We have nothing to match that with, so we're not leveraging that money. So there are a lot of other states that have, big conservation funds that actually, if they did get 50 million, they could match it with 50 million, and then so your dollar goes a lot further. So there's a lot of reasons, but I know there's also we don't get involved in this as much, but there's the Texas Land Trust Council, which is kind of our sort of trade association of those 30 plus or minus land trusts that I mentioned, and they do a great job here in Texas. They represent all the land trusts and all the interests and kind of aggregate, here's some concerns at the Capitol or here's what's happening in DC. But they've been strong advocates for both. I mentioned the Parks and Wildlife Department funding. They're kind of leading that effort to hopefully get additional funds there. And they're also plugged into DC with Washington, DC, doing some of that stuff with the Farm Bill and everything that's outside of my expertise. So I'd rather not go to DC personally, but
I,
I'll stay here and let somebody else do it.
I don't blame you. I've been there, grown up in the vicinity, been there a couple times. Yeah, they can keep it.
Yeah,
It's got cool stuff, but they can keep it. But
great place to visit.
yes. Okay, so I guess since we're coming up on the 1 o'clock hour, um, what if I guess walk us through the process of like somebody like I don't know, do y'all have like a physical door? Somebody walks in or somebody gives y'all a call or shoots an email like, hey, I want to set up a conservation easement on my property. What does that look like from like sort of like start to finish?
Mhm.
Generally speaking, I realize everyone's going to be a
Yeah.
little bit different, but what does that look like?
Yeah. So one of the questions we get a lot is how long would it take if we start right now? So before going into the exact process, they can be, I shouldn't even say this because someone will think we can do it this fast. We've done them in 2 months, which
Which
is
is
not
fast.
something
Yes.
we like to do because there's a lot of things involved, surveys, appraisals, all that stuff. We typically like to say 6 to 9 months is how
Okay.
long. And again, even that can be kind of quick if it's a whole brand new concept, you've never brought it up with your family. That's pretty quick turnaround. The longest one that we have gone from when we first started talking to when we have actually filed that conservation easement was a little over 4 years. So it can also take a long time to get everyone in the family on board and make sure everyone understands what's happening. So the initial process, so we do have a physical door, but we don't get a whole lot of walk-ins like that necessarily. It's usually a phone call or an email. Um, that initial step is a whole lot of conversation, kind of planning, information gathering. So what is your, what are your goals for the property? What is the family trying to do? Do you have the 3 kids that all want a house? Like, what are we really talking about here? It's not just as simple as we want to do a conservation easement and then the next week we sign it, right? Let's think through what we're trying to do, what you want to do, what are the features on the property that need to be protected? Are there things on here that, to your earlier question, is there a rock quarry or is there, something else that may be an issue on here? So we do a lot of kind of initial information gathering and then a lot of conversations. In today's world, it's weird because I guess a lot of landowners are absentees. I've done a lot in the last maybe since COVID, probably about 4 or 5 years of Zoom sit downs like this with landowners. They're like, oh, well, I'm in Houston and I'm wherever, and let's just get on Zoom and have a conversation. Like, okay, I guess that's the world we live in now.
Yep.
So it can be, but a lot of times, and multiple ones, right, where it's like, well, hey, my sister might want to jump in and talk about what she has going on in the family. So there's a lot of info up front where, explaining what a conservation is, what it does, all that kind of stuff. We also try to we always say, I guess if you've emailed us, maybe you're already doing this, but I mentioned the 30 land trust. We always talk about doing like research land trusts before you reach out. They all have, they're all, some of us overlap in geography, but they all kind of have their own personality or feet or you know, I guess what's most important to them. So get one that lines up with what you're trying to do on your property. It might not be us, it might be somebody else. So again, that's one of the first steps is get one that matches you because you're going to be connected with them, indefinitely. So make sure everything lines up. And then after that, then you really dive into all that information planning. We always try to do initially a lot of connections with legal and kind of financial planners or experts. So get them connected. You as the owners, hey, talk to your accountant, talk to whoever does your taxes, or talk if you have a family attorney or something. Talk through, look at your will, make sure that everything lines up with what you're talking about before we even really start going down the road. Let's make sure everything makes sense initially. So a lot of time is spent on that. So I mentioned that 4 year, 3 years of that was on that step, basically planning and gathering information. Then we'll do a site visit to the property. So we'll go out, walk the property, drive it with you, look at features, talk, same kind of thing, talk about what's important to you. Where do you want, hey, we may want a home site up here on this hillside. Like, let's talk through all that, what makes sense. And then once you kind of have the plan in place and then the property in place, then you really draft what that conservation easement looks like. So back to the very beginning where they're tailored to you. I mean, we have a starting place just so we don't like get overcharged by the attorney and he gets to draft a new one every time. Like we have one we start from.
Yeah.
But then we adjust it to, okay, well, we walked out there and they want these home sites and this, and we want to make sure that all these provisions are included in here. So then we would draft that conservation easement. There's also, I mentioned it a couple of times, kind of in passing, there's some due diligence that would need to be done once you're kind of to that stage where, yes, this is what we want to do. That include like a property survey, boundary survey. Are there areas, even if you have one, maybe there's areas you don't want to include, hey, this 20 acres by the highway, let's keep that out and it's not included in the conservation easement. Are there things like that? So surveying that out, an appraisal would be done if you want to do the tax deduction, or if we go after the funding opportunities, we'd have to have an appraisal done that shows the value of that conservation easement. I know we're almost to the 1 o'clock. I haven't talked about that, but it's basically, this is super simplifying it, but it's a kind of a before and after value. So it's, if you're going to put the property, what's the property worth today? If you're going to put it on the market free and clear, and then here's the conservation easement that says you can't develop it or whatever, what's it worth after that? Obviously you're reducing that value, so that the difference between those two is where you get the value of the conservation easement. And that value can range from, in more rural, remote areas, like maybe 30%, like a third of the property value, to if you're real close to, San Antonio or Austin, where you're in kind of the path of development, it can be 75% of the value. Yeah, exactly. Because the main part of the value, right? If you have a 50,000 acre or $50,000 an acre value, like that's definitely not agriculture, right? That's almost all development value. So you can get into, some really high numbers, but the appraisal has to be done to justify, what we're talking about when we're asking funds. So you need to do some of that due diligence, which again, those all take time, um, to get all that lined up. Once that's done, there's title work, making sure that everything's, um, like a real estate transaction, make sure everything's free and clear. And then at that point, you sign it and file it with the county. So there's a lot of moving parts. If everything goes really smoothly, 6 months. Like if we start talking to people in the summer, we can typically get them done without a whole lot of chaos at the end of the year. We do get phone calls like at Thanksgiving, like, "Hey, so I'm going to be gone at Christmas. Do you think we can get?" Like, yeah, that's not going to work. So there's just not. I mean, we can go fast, but you
Yep.
can't. You can't get a surveyor. You can't get an appraiser. You just can't. You can't
Yep.
do all that in that much time. It's not, again, not as simple as that. And we also don't like to rush, as we were talking about earlier. Like, let's be thoughtful, make sure this makes sense for you and the family. So,
So, I mean, I guess it's kind of how many conservation easements are y'all kind of working on at any given point in time? I realize, it varies, but on average, how many are y'all working on?
I'd say, we have a little thing. We have our board of directors. We meet quarterly, so we have a kind of a spreadsheet that we share. That's like, here's all of the active projects and kind of like a heat chart, like, are we red, yellow, green? Like, do we have a problem here? Is this one going forward? Um, so I'd say right now we probably have about 20 to 25 that are
Okay.
on there that are active. Um, Again, some of those are much more active. So I'd say probably right now we have 5 or 6 that are like really active,
Mhm.
that will likely, I say active, like we're scrambling around trying to get stuff done this year.
Right.
The other ones, not that they're not active, but we're in the early, like, "Hey, yeah, you
Different
talk with your
stage.
family and
Yeah.
we'll get back with you," kind of thing. So yeah. But I will say the interest, it's not just our organization, but across the state has grown dramatically over the last couple of years. For obvious reasons, the state is growing so quickly that, hey, more people see it at their front gate. Like,
Yep.
"Hey, well, wait a second, what can we do um, to maybe keep this land in the family or whatever?" So it's a lot more prominent. And again, we are not at all anti-growth. We're all about economic growth and jobs and prosperity and all that. We look at it as a balance between the two.
Yeah.
Like, let's, one, protecting ag viability is economic, so we're your land based, but we're also not trying to stop actual economic growth here in our state. So a nice balance between the two.
Yes. Yes. As with everything in
For
life, you
sure.
need you need balance because you got to feed the people too. They got to have their hamburgers and their hot dogs, just
Yeah,
like
I
they
don't
need a
know.
house to live in.
I guess that's not what Bill Gates said. I don't think
Oh,
you make it in a lab or something. I don't know.
oh, okay. Well, I mean, Carly, do you have anything else any other questions or anything we didn't cover? I mean,
No, and I learned a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks again for having me. Really
yeah.
appreciate it.
And Jeff, is there anything else that you wanted to, any last minute things or anything that we didn't cover that you want to cover real quick? And it's one of the things, Jeff, if we go over the 1 o'clock hour, unless you need to be somewhere, we can hang around for a couple more minutes. So,
No, nothing major. Again, I would just encourage, you can definitely go to our website, Colorado River Land Trust, or the Texas Land Trust Council that I mentioned. They have a lot of high level information on conservation easements, like what is this tool about, and then it will have all, depending on where you're at. Obviously, we're Blanco County. There's a couple that work in Blanco County, but if you have family property in the Panhandle, there are groups, and you can find them on that website, kind of where line up where you're.
more suited to where you're
Yeah,
located and
yeah,
your,
exactly,
yeah, your eco region. So,
exactly. Yeah, there you go. There's a
all
science
right.
word for it. Yeah, thank
Well,
you again, guys. I really
yeah,
appreciate it.
Jeff, I greatly
Thank you.
appreciate it. We will hope you'll have a fantastic Tuesday. We will not see you next week. Is that correct? Did I? Did I get that right?
Oh, yes, we're gonna record next week and then
Yeah.
post it later.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So we won't be live. We'll be here. We won't be live. But hope you all have a great Tuesday. Can't believe it's August. Can I just say that? Summer's almost over. Holy cow, which it's been a mild summer. So I'm grateful for that, but holy cow. But yeah, hope you all have a great Tuesday and we will see y'all later. Bye.
Thank you.
Yes.